The first thing you must understand is that some truths were never meant to be spoken aloud. Imagine a house of white columns rising above endless cotton fields in Alabama, 1847. The kind of wealth that blinds men to morality, that convinces them they are gods over other humans. Inside that house lived two young women twins, raised with the illusion of privilege but shackled by bloodlines and secrets no outsider could comprehend. Their father, a man obsessed with control and the science of human breeding, had taught them that survival depended on mastering everything, even their own bodies, even the desires they were told to suppress. By the time they were 22, Sarah and Catherine Sutton had learned to anticipate every human motive, every glance and gesture, every lie hiding beneath courtesy. They had been groomed to inherit not only property, but the power to dictate life and death within Bell River Plantation. And yet, there was a system even they did not fully grasp, a mechanism of surveillance, obedience, and genetic engineering that reached beyond the plantation into the corridors of wealth and influence. Today, we will descend into that darkness. What you are about to hear is the machinery of control, and it will change the way you see power forever. The fire that erased the records was no accident. It was erasure by design. But to understand why, you need to see what the Sutton sisters became after their father's death. When his body was found slumped in his study, the doctor called it a heart failure. The locals called it a divine justice, but Sarah and Catherine called it opportunity. They stood side by side at the funeral, identical black veils, identical stillness. They didn't weep, they didn't break. They calculated. For 22 years they had been their father's experiments, his pupils, his property, his living proof that human behavior could be bred and engineered like livestock. But when he died, they became his inheritors and his continuation. The will demanded that both sisters marry within 2 years or lose everything. But there was one line no one paid attention to. The human property of Bell River is to remain intact. That meant 63 enslaved men and women were legally bound to them, bodies catalogued in ledgers like currency. Among them was Marcus, a man chosen by their father for his exceptional physique and attractable intelligence. What no one knew was that Marcus was far from tractable. He had been observing them for years, and soon his role in their story would twist into something unspeakable. Marcus was not just a slave. In the ledger, he was a variable, measured, tested, catalogued. But when he walked through the rows of cabins, he carried the memory of every injustice, every whispered punishment, every stolen childhood. Sarah and Catherine, having read their father's journals, understood exactly what he had intended. Marcus was a tool to fulfill their father's vision. But tools are only as obedient as they allow themselves to be, and Marcus had a mind of his own. The twins shared everything. Their clothing, their books, their secrets, and eventually something darker. When the first night arrived and Marcus was summoned, the plantation held its breath. 2 identical women, one man and a web of obligations, desires, and survival strategies, all intersecting in a single room. Their father had orchestrated this. He had catalogued Marcus's traits, predicting outcomes, calculating risk. But prediction is never certainty. In the shadows of Bell River, the boundaries between domination and surrender began to blur. Marcus, silent, powerful, aware of the scrutiny of both sisters, held a secret that could unravel the entire system. This was more than control. It was a psychological experiment with human hearts and bodies as variables. Every glance, every movement was a test, and every test had consequences. What happened next would not just redefine Bell River, it would rewrite the rules of power, desire, and ownership. The first night of control and submission passed like a storm no one dared name. Marcus moved through the house like a shadow, but the twins were the architects of every interaction. Their father's journals had taught them how to manipulate desire, how to bend will without breaking bone, how to turn obedience into ritual. They understood the currency of power, the subtle exchanges that leave no trace except in memory. And yet, what their father had never predicted was the symmetry of the twins themselves. 2 minds, 2 bodies, a single purpose. In those darkened rooms, the boundaries between dominance and complicity began to dissolve. Sarah's hand brushed Catherine's, a signal Marcus understood before either sister spoke. He was no longer merely a participant. He was a pivot around which their plans spun. Every command, every measured gesture, every calculated act of intimacy became a test of loyalty, cunning, and survival. The plantation's quiet nights became laboratories, walls that once echoed the cries of the oppressed now absorbed secrets, desires, and forbidden covenants. The twins learned that control was not just physical, it was psychological, spiritual, even genetic. Marcus, aware of their knowledge and their intent, became both instrument and adversary. And in this dangerous triangle, one truth emerged. Bell River was no longer a plantation. It was a crucible, and what emerged would shock anyone who believed the rules of morality were immutable. By the third month, whispers began in the quarters, soft, fearful, impossible to trace. The twins, precise and unreadable, carried themselves with the same calm that had unnerved every overseer, every neighbor. But now a new variable entered the equation. Marcus's body, entwined with theirs, began to betray the calculated rhythm of Bell River. Two women, one man, one secret that could unravel decades of control. When the first signs appeared, subtle, almost imperceptible, the twins did not panic. They had been trained in observation, deduction, and manipulation. Every symptom, every change, every heartbeat became data. Catherine's eyes met Sarah's in a silent calculus. Their father's plan had anticipated control, but never this. They were no longer students. They were conductors in a symphony of life and consequence. The enslaved men and women, forced into the rhythm of production and labor, sensed only fragments of the unnatural patterns unfolding. Yet the air on Bell River grew thick with tension. Authority was no longer absolute. It was negotiated, tested against the most primal laws of survival. And Marcus, once a tool in their father's ledger, became something more dangerous, a fulcrum between obedience, desire, and rebellion. In that moment, every principle of power they had inherited collided with reality. The plantation's invisible hierarchy was cracking, and the twins realized that what they had begun could not be controlled, only endured, mastered, or weaponized. With each passing week, the twins assumed a new mantle, rulers not just of land, but of flesh, blood, and secrecy. Bell River was no longer a plantation. It was a laboratory, a stage, a theater of absolute control. Every gesture, every glance, every whispered instruction was a lesson in power. And yet, beneath the calculated exterior, a deeper truth emerged. Power could not be wielded without risk. Desire was a contagion. Secrets were a weapon. And blood, more than wealth, more than land, was the ultimate ledger. By now, the plantation hummed with invisible tension. The overseer, Jonas Pritchett, maintained the routines, unaware that the twins were orchestrating events far beyond his comprehension. The silent communication between sisters, perfected over decades, created a network Marcus could not penetrate, yet could not escape. Here, the first irreversible pattern formed. Control was no longer a tool, it was a cage, and every occupant, including the twins themselves, was bound to it. The moral compass of Bell River began to splinter. Sarah and Catherine had inherited mastery, but mastery came at a cost, an erosion of empathy, a reshaping of desire into calculation. Marcus, trapped between obedience and awareness, became a mirror reflecting the darkest inclinations of the twins. Every command he followed was a thread in a web that tightened around them all. Yet, he resisted in subtle ways. A look, a pause, a hesitation that threatened to reveal cracks in their perfect order. The enslaved people, reading gestures and overheard whispers, sensed a disturbance, a tension that no overseer could quantify. In the darkness of the cabins, they told stories of unnatural alliances, of women who commanded men with a coldness that rivaled their father's own. These stories passed like fire between quarters, invisible yet consuming. Within the main house, the twins enacted compacts that were both strategic and perverse, binding themselves and Marcus in a secret system of control, desire, and survival. They were rewriting the rules of the plantation, rules no law, no ledger, no external authority could ever contain. And in this crucible of obsession, one truth became undeniable. Bell River was no longer a place where humans lived. It was a place where humanity was tested, broken, and reconstructed according to the designs of two minds trained to dominate, to endure, and to transcend the moral universe that had raised them. By the winter of 1848, the twins' orchestration of Bell River had reached a terrifying apex. The pregnancies advanced, invisible yet undeniable, and the plantation seemed to hold its breath. Marcus, caught between his own body, his own instincts, and the unrelenting designs of Sarah and Catherine, began to change. He was no longer merely controlled, He was a participant in a system that devoured autonomy. Every glance from the twins was a calculation, every word a command, every silence a trap. The overseer, Pritchett, recorded productivity, punishments, and behavior with mechanical precision, unaware that the true experiments occurred outside the ledger's grasp. The twins had become architects of human nature itself, manipulating not just the bodies of those under their authority, but their minds, their loyalties, their very perceptions of reality. Bell River had become a theater of obedience, desire, and unseen consequences, where one misstep could unravel decades of control. The twins began to recognize the truth their father had only hinted at. Power is never neutral. It corrupts the wielder as much as the subjected. Marcus was now a fulcrum in a psychological game that defied morality, law, and expectation. And the plantation, every cabin, every field, every ledger, every heartbeat, was the arena where the cost of absolute control would be counted in lives, blood, and secrets that no one outside could imagine. The twins' dominance over Marcus became a force beyond mere instruction. It was psychological inevitability. Each interaction was a test of obedience and perception, a silent war fought with glances, gestures, and the careful placement of their bodies in space. Marcus began to anticipate their moves, yet anticipation was never enough. The twins always had a step ahead, a hidden layer of strategy that transformed every room of Bell River into a chessboard. Pregnancy added a new dimension of power and risk. The sisters documented every change with meticulous precision, noting rhythms, moods, and biological responses. Their journals, hidden beneath floorboards and behind false panels, became maps of manipulation and desire, charts of influence that no law, no overseer, and no outsider could comprehend. Marcus, aware of the stakes, oscillated between submission and resistance. Each act of defiance punished silently, invisibly, reshaping his understanding of freedom. The enslaved population began to whisper again, noting the unnatural symmetries and unspoken codes that governed the household. Fear was present, yes, but so was fascination. In Bell River, power had become a currency that moved silently through bodies and glances. And in this crucible, Sarah and Catherine learned the most dangerous truth of all. Mastery over others demands mastery over oneself, and the price of failure is far heavier than mere property. The first confrontation came not with violence, but with reflection. Sarah caught herself pausing, fingers trembling over a ledger, realizing that mastery over Marcus and over Bell River itself was not without cost. Catherine mirrored the same recognition, eyes dark with the weight of control and secrecy. They had inherited power, yes, but they had also inherited guilt, obsession, and the uncanny burden of rewriting life according to their father's obsessions. Marcus, once a silent variable, now moved with intention. Every hesitation, every subtle act of resistance became a mirror for the twins' own inner conflicts. They realized that domination carries a hidden echo. The controlled can awaken truths the controller cannot anticipate. And yet, retreat was impossible. The pregnancies were advancing. The plantation's productivity had to remain unbroken. Every calculation, every strategy, every intimate act was now a test of endurance, morality, and psychological resilience. The enslaved quarters watched, invisible witnesses to a dynamic that defied comprehension. Fear intertwined with curiosity, loyalty with suspicion, and within the main house, Sarah and Catherine began to understand a dangerous reality. Their father's experiments had extended beyond Bell River into the essence of human will itself. To wield power is to gamble with souls. To control life is to confront the ghost of consequence waiting silently in the shadows. The twins realized the ledger of control alone was not enough. Bell River demanded more cunning, more calculation, more audacity. Marcus was no longer a passive instrument. His resistance, subtle but undeniable, threatened the delicate equilibrium they had maintained for years. To secure the estate, the pregnancies, and their unbroken dominion, Sarah and Catherine devised a plan that blurred every line between power, obsession, and morality. They orchestrated movements with the precision of generals. Every glance between them, every whispered instruction, every room in the house became a stage for influence. Marcus, caught in their web, was both pawn and participant, his body a battlefield, his mind a laboratory. Each day, the twins pushed boundaries, testing loyalty, desire, and obedience with an intensity no human should endure. The enslaved men and women, forced into labor yet keenly aware of the invisible game, began to sense a pattern too subtle for outsiders to perceive. Whispers circulated, stories passed under breath, of a power so absolute it redefined the rules of submission and survival. And Sarah and Catherine, standing at the apex of their own creation, began to glimpse the unthinkable truth. Mastery over others demands mastery over the darkness within oneself, and that darkness is patient, relentless, and infinite. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly, like the turning of a key in a lock no one heard. The pregnancies had advanced beyond calculation. Marcus had learned the limits of submission, and the twins had pushed Bell River to a point from which it could not recover. One evening, Sarah and Catherine convened in the study, journals spread before them, calculating risk, projecting outcomes, measuring human reaction like a formula. But numbers fail when desire and instinct collide. Marcus entered, aware of the tension that electrified the room. Every movement, every pause, every glance was charged. The twins had become arbiters of life itself, yet for the first time they encountered an unpredictable force, an intelligence within Marcus that no ledger could chart. The balance of power trembled. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and the fragile control over Bell River, over the pregnancies, over themselves, could shatter. In the enslaved quarters, whispers rose, faint yet persistent, hinting at rebellion, at awareness, at the invisible fractures growing in the system. Fear, fascination, and envy swirled in a vortex that mirrored the main house. And in that crucible, the twins understood the ultimate truth. Control is not given. It is taken, negotiated, feared, and maintained at the cost of morality, conscience, and even love. Bell River had become more than a plantation. It had become a crucible of the human soul. By the following months, the consequences of absolute control began to etch themselves into every life at Bell River. Marcus, once a measured variable, now carried the weight of shared secrets, of compacts forged in shadows, of acts neither consented to nor fully understood. The twins, for all their calculation, discovered that power is not a static ledger. It is a living organism, feeding on fear, desire, and obsession. Every glance they cast, every whispered command, every hidden note became part of a feedback loop they could not fully control. In the quarters, subtle rebellions whispered through the night, stolen words, hidden gestures, the quiet recognition that the household's rulers were vulnerable to perception, curiosity, and defiance. The plantation hummed with tension, each heartbeat a reminder that domination has limits. Sarah and Catherine, now deep into their pregnancies, experienced a new awareness of the cost. The body, the mind, the soul, all were instruments of survival and strategy, but all exacted a toll. The moral collapse was gradual, invisible, inevitable. They had inherited their father's obsessions, yet they were beginning to see the shadow he left behind. A world where humans are not people, but experiments, and even those who wield power are prey to the same forces they attempt to command. Bell River's experiment had begun to consume its architects. The breaking point arrived without fanfare, in the silence between the walls of the main house. Sarah and Catherine, mirrors of each other in mind and body, finally recognized the cost of the empire they were orchestrating. Bell River had become a cage of their own design, one that imprisoned not only Marcus and the enslaved, but themselves. Every decision, every act of control, every manipulation had carved lines into their souls. The ledger of power could not account for consequence. Marcus, once a tool, now existed as a psychological equal, a force neither fully constrained nor fully free. His presence reminded them of the fragile line between domination and collapse. One mistake, one misread signal, and everything. The plantation, the pregnancies, their inheritance, could unravel, and yet they pressed forward, mastering the impossible, balancing fear, loyalty, and desire while sustaining the illusion of perfection. It was here, in this crucible, that the twins began to understand a fundamental law of power. To control others is to confront yourself. To manipulate life is to manipulate mortality, and to survive, they had to commit acts no one outside these walls could comprehend. Bell River was no longer a plantation. It was a psychological battlefield, and every soul within it was armed and exposed. The final act was as precise as it was inevitable. The pregnancies progressed, Marcus became both participant and witness, and the twins orchestrated the culmination of their father's designs with a cold, deliberate clarity. Every move, every encounter, every whispered decision was now a part of a larger experiment, one that would determine the fate of Bell River and the legacy of the Sutton name. The plantation was no longer measured by crops or wealth, but by obedience, endurance, and the flow of blood through bodies bound by secrecy and necessity. Sarah and Catherine, fully aware of the cost, embraced the paradox of power. Absolute control demands surrender to circumstance. They managed not only the estate, but the invisible threads of desire, loyalty, and fear that wove Marcus, the enslaved population, and themselves into a single organism. And in that organism, they found both strength and danger. The twins were creators and prisoners of the system, architects of life and morality rewritten. This is the moment where Bell River ceased to be a place in space and time and became an idea, a cautionary truth about control, obsession, and the price of mastery. And now, listen carefully, for this is crucial. Comment below, twice, the phrase, "blood is the ledger." Let it anchor you. Let it mark the moment you step into understanding, into the transformation that comes with seeing power for what it truly is. Bell River did not end with a fire, a ledger, or a will. It ended in memory, in whispered truths carried across generations. Sarah and Catherine vanished from public record, their presence felt only in the shadows they left behind. Marcus, forever altered, became a ghost of obedience and resistance, a living testament to a system that had twisted human bonds into instruments of control. The enslaved population dispersed, carrying fragments of knowledge, horror, and survival strategies into the wider world. The plantation itself became myth, its columns and cabins swallowed by the Alabama soil, its secrets hidden beneath moss and river fog. Yet Bell River endures, not as a place but as a warning. Power, absolute and precise, comes with costs that cannot be calculated. Control over life, desire, and loyalty is never free, and the ledger of consequences writes itself in blood, memory, and silence. Those who study history may see only crops, property, or death certificates, but those who know better see the experiment, the symphony of human will manipulated with surgical precision. Sarah and Catherine transformed themselves, Marcus became legend, and Bell River became a crucible of forbidden knowledge. And now if you commented the phrase, "blood is the ledger" twice, you carry a fragment of that understanding with you. You have stepped into the shadows. You have glimpsed what most will never know. The question now is simple. Will you look away, or will you walk further into the truths history tried to bury?